Get your hands off my dink. The way of the nerds.
Hey everyone, so if you are watching this, you probably have stumbled across the Arcanum OST remixes in some format of another that I've been doing either on the SoundCloud, YouTube, or Bandcamp, or Reddit, subreddit for Arcanum and game music, or any of that. So just to kind of preface this, I'm doing this all in one take because I suck at editing, and I just wanted to put this out here to kind of show basically the rundown of how I've been doing a lot of this stuff and learning and working with Ableton and what I've kind of been doing recently as far as all that goes as a breakdown for everyone. Because I've gotten a couple of questions from people as far as like from the general aesthetic of remixing an album that is basically orchestral in and of itself completely versus what I'm doing, and everything from that to just like how everything works in general. So kind of a little backstory before I get into it. I've been doing music on and off for about 15 years in various forms with other people, with myself, stuff at home, that sort of thing. Some of it you can see online if you, again, go to the Electric Dojo or Way of the Nerds, YouTube, SoundCloud, Bandcamp, any of that stuff. But because I've been out in California with COVID and the lockdown and gig work being a thing of the past at this point, and have been since March, I've started working more at home with Ableton as my DAW for trying to get better at doing production in general, kind of knowing music already for the most part, most things here and there, but and having played several instruments, some better than others over the years. So one of the things that I have been a huge fan of has been video game OSTs, and that's been everything from the old PS1 JRPGs like Chrono Trigger, and specifically what kind of got me into this as an example would be like Two Mellows, Chrono Jigga remake, mashup remix album between Chrono Trigger and I believe Jay-Z's The Black Album, if I remember correctly. And so one of the things I wanted to do was kind of a version inspired that through what I had with Ableton and the plugins that I use to do a kind of what you would call more contemporary, synth-y, more air quotes, video game style music of Arcanum's OST from Troika Games back in 2001, I believe. And so, which is just all a string quartet for the most part, except for a couple of weird ambient synth stuff that that Ben Hughes uses, the composer uses for certain, kind of like dungeon atmosphere tracks. They're not really anything more than that, so I don't plan on doing stuff with those. So, because when I was looking stuff up for the longest time for Arcanum, it was always just strict covers of people at Allstate, that kind of stuff. They do like a performance of usually the main theme or something like that. And it's always good because I love the soundtrack, but I was like, man, what would it be like if Arcanum had a regular soundtrack, kind of still keeping with the key that each sample or track is using, kind of the same kind of sad industrial motif, industrial in like the era, not in the genre, but like sort of keeping in that vibe, in the traditional like pop music being sad and of sad pop music self sort of mentality. So keeping it, thinking along those lines, I started using midis that I got off VG Music. I've recently got acquired more from the composer himself's website, he had a link to a .mus reader that exported in MIDI, thankfully. So I actually have the full OST in MIDI format now, which I'll show you why I use specifically instead of the audio files. But started working with the MIDIs and kind of not knowing from jump a whole lot beyond what I knew of music and had seen other people do outside of what I had done in other genres. Specifically, I'd probably say this is more closer to like turntablism than anything. So kind of here we go. So what I would start with is a cut. Don't worry about the prefaces. I don't know if it's getting my cursor, although I'm pretty sure I have it set to. As far as this stuff goes, this is actually all misnomers because I am super lazy and did not actually anticipate doing this. I am just super blazed and it's late and I figured I'd get this knocked out because it's something I wanted to do because I've needed to do because people have been asking me. So our top track here under the Mellotron, which I use for the Arcanum MIDI specifically, is our main cut. It's been spliced, so what I would start with would have been the whole track itself, which I believe this one is not Blackroot. It would be Last Dance of the Ashland Tribe, which would be Town. So I would have the whole Town's cut here, or whichever MIDI. Insert the Mellotron, which I use for all of the, which I use the 5 version from Arturia. So, have that set to long time ago, asterisk. That's kind of like the quintessential sound I've found that is closest to what they have as far as that original vibe. Kind of like if you want that like wholesome, old-timey 1950s, you never born anywhere close to it type vibe. That warm feeling of nostalgia, you always, want to go for a Mellotron. So we go for that. I would go through each one of these. This one, for instance, is Towns, if I remember. And so I would go through, and typically what I look for when I'm analyzing MIDIs is I'm looking for breaks where there's a lot happening in a small area. So, like, for instance, these areas, I would take normally a bar or two, like a couplet. That's obviously just from looking at this kind of bland. So if I were to play this back, kind of cool, just a straight stab, nothing really to write home about. I kind of try to look for something where there's a little more action, like more steps going up, going down. And then I will either take 2 or 4 bars of that and kind of just see what they sound like when you loop them back and forth. The idea being again, no one who can really remix because there's a lot of key changes going on. So I try to find a cut. So like how a turntablist would take a record, spin it, find the break, find a sample, and then loop that sample back and forth is kind of how I tried to do it because I'm an idiot. So as you can tell right there, there's cut over and over again. If I loop this back, well, let's start from the beginning here. So this is how it would kind of sound in my mind. I try to take about 10 seconds or so. Find a good opener. Nice stab opener. Plays out a bit. And then you hit that cut. And I'm like, okay, I can do a lot with that. And then the weed kicks in, and then, you start thinking of the good vibes. So copy that over and over again. Make sure that everything's spliced correctly, because if you go through here and check your linkages between tracks, you'll notice these do not overlap. Any that sometimes they will, so I have to go in and manually set them apart. Sometimes it'll read it through the reader and export the MIDI with weird velocities. So on occasion, you'll get weird jumps. I don't think I have any in here, but if you listen to the Isle the 8 People, Isle Despair remix, you'll definitely hear a little bit of it at the beginning. Can't really do much to fix that. That's kind of an internal issue with the sequencer on the exporter for that reader, which is Finale Notepad, I believe. Work with what you got, people. So take that. We got our main cut. It's been sampled. We sequence it out or section it out, repeat it, have automation go down on the decibel, link that with MIDI 2. Most of the times I link this together, but I didn't this time for whatever reason. But this second bank for this stem would be, I believe, just an RC20. So I use an RC20 on most of mine. Typically what I'll do is I'll either bank it to the Mellotron itself or in its own MIDI, and then have a low but not completely cut off decibel so that it plays out for the rest of it. Played around with the bit for the first couple of cuts, settled with vinyl 2 setting, kind of kept it pretty simple, but when it plays out you'll hear a little bit of crackling again to give it that kind of old-timey vibe like you're listening to a gramophone, which keeps in, spirit with the whole Arcanum. It's a gramophone, industrial area. Old-timey. It's made to sound old. That'll loop, go down, RC20 will start to go down. And then the fun begins. So what I'll do is typically take a section cut that I've then manually done. So what I mean is I'll copy that, take that down to another stem, manually copy it with on its own, not copy the MIDI itself, because the MIDI will have weird velocities and stuff. So do a straight dry copy, repeat that, and typically, not all the time, but usually I'll get a decent background sound or two for a sequencer or a track for that. So for instance, with this, I wanted to use Towns as the remix for something to do with the Thanatos Island, because I'm trying to kind of use every spot on the Arcanum map to kind of fill out the OST remixes as a whole. So I wanted to do a Thanatos Island at some point. I didn't want to have any connection really with the whole Nazarudin burial place, anything. I just wanted something to do with either the tribe or just the play with the sounds that you would get from that style of a motif. So this, of course, would be Last Dance of the Ashland tribe. So kind of played off of that, did a couple of sounds with it that I ended up getting. So we'll go through them. First one I got, again, from the same cut that we resampled off of the MIDI. Whoops. And these will loop back and forth. So this would be a Rhodes Stage 3, probably dark. Yeah, Stage dark. So this would be a standard kind of Rhodes sound, a little bit thicker on the lower end. This actually comes with the MIDI. This is another thing I usually have to do, is with the MIDI, there's usually a single sustained note of some sort, like a tonic or a subtonic or something. So with the MIDI, at least especially at the beginning, I leave those alone. I want to sustain that original sound, but as you can tell later, I cut that section of sustain out, or at least with this upper part here from the cello. So that way the bass doesn't play off of each other too much. You keep the high end cut, so and the idea being when you would sample something like you would back in the day, you would cut the low end or high end out. So kind of the same thing. So anyway, going back to this, Stage 5 Rhodes, nice mellow keyboard sound. This was a fun one. This was, I needed a backing track, and sometimes in a Blue Moon, Pigments, which I also use, comes through with a cool thing. This being jungle pads. So of course, being a pad, has a lot of overtones with various sounds. Kind of sounds like a pipe. Various chirps, birds, stuff of that nature playing off of the sequence. Really cool. Kind of stumbled upon that by accident. Came across another stumble on Pigment by accident that worked really well with this cut. We'll get to that here in a second. So overdid that with both of those. So we now have our jungle pad and our Rhodes. So kind of both smooth tones. Usually do a pluck of some kind, stab. This one kind of played right into the same thing. This one would be a Serum. Phantom stab set to wah wah, no noise. Again, kind of just, this is to set up all the background stuff, so to speak. And then we get to what I have to do, which is like the creative, not just taking a sample and redoing stuff with it. So putting in different times, bass lines, drums, that sort of stuff. So once we have that all set down in the top three, where it's, all right, we got some vibes, we got some flows going, I'll set a bass line, stabs, that sort of stuff, and either set them up to come in directly or link them in to slowly come in as the main cut vibes out. So this would be, of course, the bass line. Less bass line. I think this is actually set to a 2 or 3 on the octave scale. And there's our regular bass. Yeah. So same pattern, regular bass line. Not even sure if that's set to 2 or 3, but same mirror, same thing, just more vibes, kind of horn sort of vibe. Slowly kick it in, fade it in. We would then have for the rest of this stabs. So sometimes I will do synth stabs that are the same as violin plucks that I use through Spitfire Labs, which is excellent as a free plugin, VST. So as you can tell, kind of just a little hook arrangement, switch it up a little bit between each one. Fill that in, get it down here, and then what'll probably happen is there's a synth that'll mirror that. Exactly. So this is probably reversed box, yeah. So high phaser content, just something to kind of give it a little more oomph, not just little plucks here and there. Then when we get to drum patterns kind of something I learn a little bit here and there with each track. So instead of doing just a regular same old house beat, this was kind of like meant to be very vibrant, very energetic, sort of like a tribal beat. Again, you're supposed to invoke the idea of this being like The Last Dance. So we would have a drum section hooked up with something along those lines. Nothing fancy. I don't have too much set up on the way of drums. I'm still learning, but kind of that setup with your claps and not the same thing. Let's see. Go down over to claps and snares. I believe this is set up through the sauce from DJ Swivel. Hi-hats set up independently. Nothing fancy on this. Some quarter notes, 16ths here and there. And then I believe shakers on the bottom. A little bit? Or no, those were the shakers. So scroll back up. Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's right. That's because we're looking at the wrong one. So yeah, shakers on this side, hi-hats on the top part. Just kind of something to fill out the void. You don't want to just have snare hits. That gets a little bit old. So then on these breaks right here, what I'll typically do is let this play out for a full section. So you would have not just silence, because I have this track soloed. Let's go back up. So I would then lock in this first part. You got the Charlton Heston sound from the Mellotron. Let this play out for a sec while I take a hit. Demonstrate kind of the build up. You've heard the song before. two things. So one thing, real quick, what I like to do and see a lot of times with my stuff and other people's stuff, because this is something I'm learning. Two is a lot of control over the decibels. So having cuts like here, making sure things come through, having raises where everything kind of gets a little bit louder, gets a little bit softer, that sort of stuff. But anyway, so get to these breaks in between each part. Typically what I try to do with these is have main intro, build-up section, if there is one. What you would call like a verse, break, verse, big break. And then what I do nowadays is try to have basically one whole beat and another whole beat. And then have two verses for each beat. And then break them up, do different stuff on each verse, have different cuts. So that way you're getting a lot out of it. It's only a 2-minute song, but it's not, there's no vocals. So you kind of have to give a lot as far as just a beat goes. So 2 minutes, you know, basically, you know, 2 beats per cut. And I try to make them as varied as possible. And I do these little breaks in between each one to kind of show where the strings are and what they're doing so that you have a continuity. As you can tell, it starts off, kind of plays out, kind of like how you would see in a sequence of some sort visually, maybe even. And then usually on the second verse of the first half, I would have the strings come in, or the main cut come back in, and then play out through the rest of the song as you see through here. So main cut comes in right after our break. Everything will cut off. And then I'll have usually certain things play out while that's happening. As for instance, here I'll have certain extra drum parts occurring. The sequencer here for jungle kept playing. But I also have later here and done with pigments, again, kind of came up with something strange out of nowhere. Preset called Tomb, which basically, depending on what you have set to certain inputs, MIDI for me, it will play a beat off that as well as its pitch. So it kind of does like a weird drum line beat. Pretty cool. Have that set up on all the breaks, playing with everything else independently from the rest of the drums, kind of again to give more layers to everything, to make feel like there's more going on than just the song playing. So then hit the second part of the second verse of the first half, verse air quotes, and this is where I start kind of cutting things out from that I've used in the intro. So like this sequencer pad, or the Rhodes, I should say, I cut out because at this point I'm going to replace a lot of things with the main cut that I want people to hear throughout the rest of the song. So kind of tone it back on that stuff. Keep the main stabs for the bass line, for that sort of stuff, and then the drum parts, but switch it up. Usually on the second half of each verse, for the first little quarter of it, I take the main percussion out, kind of just to variate the drums a little bit as far as having a breakdown, if you want to even call that. But that way you just have a little bit of verses. And again, you can get a little more intricate with it. I could as well, but I'm trying to just keep the vibe going, so I'm not trying to get too crazy with it. But yeah, keep that going. This plays off for the rest of the first half, and then you'll hit the 2 measure breaks that I usually do. Again, usually have something playing with it. This time it's the tune preset, as well as having, I believe, the bass line or bass kick going as well. Doing, you know, just something simple. And then get to the second beat of the song, which is a completely different beat. So again, kind of sequencing all this based off what I'm hearing from. And then kick it off directly into the next one, which would be... And so what I did here was have your main parts, Obviously stabs. Mirror that off with, is this a bass? No, this would be another layer I have, I believe, with crushed. Yeah, crushed melody. So, another sequencer. Little bit of delay to kind of play off of the main stabs, but also to play with the mellotron that I have set up for flutes that is offset from that with a different part. And probably what I would have done if I had more time, not so much even more time, but just more energy looking back on it, would be to incorporate a chorus effect that would get bigger as that goes on. So instead of just having the, you would have overtones like dun 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 ba 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 ba, getting louder and louder. But keeping the vibe of it being just, you know, again, the last dance of a tribe of people, not the guys doing, you know, whatever the Space Jam song is or something, you know what I mean? Like, I think it was okay. So this kind of plays out. You have different stabs coming at different velocities of time, but mostly in the same area. So usually at this point in the second part again of whatever verse, I'll switch it up, cut something out. So at this point we have, I believe, Exodar. Kind of another pad, gives a nice vibrant overtone of a sequence. Lots of bells. Kind of trying to bring that idea of looking back at something fondly in memory of. Of course, we have the tomb drum line that plays out to the rest of it, goes down. Exodar as well goes out in the sequence. Through here, drum line plays out. And then sometimes I'll bring back in either the second part of the second verse or in the outro something from the beginning that doesn't match the second part entirely. So for here we have the main stab of the reverse box that plays out with the jungle pad and the main sample. And various things cut out at certain points. The drum line actually fades instead of cuts. Kind of again to just give that idea of longing and looking back at something, because obviously we're talking about people we've lost at this point in the game as far as the chronology of us playing the game at the point in the game that we come upon them, even though they're not there anymore. So again, kind of general idea. So weird example, of course, but this was also one that I had specifically been requested to, as far as this track goes, have available for download. So kind of prompted me to get Bandcamp up and running for the Dojo and get this set up for it. Again, kind of just the basic rundown, 2 beats, 2 verses each, cuts here and there. Play each individual sample out through each part, but kind of just have your own take on it and do your own thing on it. So if anyone's interested, I might end up doing another one of these videos for a different track. If anyone's interested and wants to see a breakdown for it, message me. I'm on Reddit, SoundCloud, YouTube, and Bandcamp. So anywho, take